the causes that Holy Apostles does a lot to support is this Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and they have a relationship with an organization called Reclaiming Hope, for whom they build hope bags, and those bags go to the authorities who come into contact with those who they're bringing out of human trafficking situations. So if you're interested in supporting this effort, you can talk to Lily Wright, who is the Respect Life coordinator here for Holy Apostles. She's standing back by the table, or you can take one of their bulletins, and it's got all the lists of all the things that go into those bags, and it would be a great student project or a great project for your group if that's something that you're interested in.
And Julie, just so you know, typically we do it for teenagers, but this year we do it for 9, 10, and 11 and 12-year-olds that have been rescued from human trafficking.
Now I get the great pleasure of introducing to you Dr. Heidi Petak. She is a communications professor at Colorado Christian University and a volunteer for Abortion Survivors Network.
Thank you. Well, it's my privilege to get to be with you today. I am not your guest speaker. I'm going to introduce the guest speaker. But a couple things that I wanted to tell you about first that you might not be aware of. Failed abortions, or I would call them babies that survive, have happened long before abortions became legal, and they still happen today. Based on the failure rates of abortion as outlined by Dr. Willard Cates, there are an estimated 400 to 500 live births every year. And that means that over the last 50 years, there are tens of thousands of abortion survivors out there, and right here, living among us. Survivors survive attempts like chemical abortions, the abortion pill, D&Cs, D&Es, induction, twins, where one twin is taken and the other twin is left unharmed, sailing, instruments, and even at-home attempts. Most survivors, this is interesting, are actually raised in their biological homes. And for some, that is a really good source of healing and blessing for them. For others, it's a source of more trauma for them. Many abortion survivors have also had abortions. And one survivor that I know has even worked in an abortion clinic. There's a generational cycle to abortion. And it's an effect of trauma that we have to break. It starts by breaking the silence in our families and in our churches. And I applaud all of you for breaking that silence and being a part of this movement. Survivors of abortion are not who you would expect them to be. They're just like the rest of us. You probably pass them at the grocery store, getting your hair cut, walking down the street. They're everywhere. But they're carrying invisible scars that you can't see because they're not on the outside usually, but they're wounds. And they're wounds that need special care. They need healing. They need community. They need empowerment. They need education and skill development. Enter the Abortion Survivors Network. It is the only organization in the world right now that supports abortion survivors. They've now connected with more than 400 survivors all around the world. Survivors are finding healing. They're using their voices to tell their stories of redemption for the very first time. And this is amazing, but the majority of them are believers in Jesus Christ. They know that their lives are a miracle. Which brings us to our guest speaker today, Michelle Lyman. She lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband, Herb. Michelle is the owner of several businesses. She's a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. And she's an amazing woman of God. So I am honored to introduce Michelle Lyman.
Thank you so much, everyone, for having us here and for coming today. It's a real honor to be here. How many of you have seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Did you know that the original title for the story was The Greatest Gift? Yeah. And George Bailey, the story's main character, he didn't believe that his life, he told Clarence the angel that he wished he had never been born. And it wasn't until, in effect, that Clarence temporarily takes away George's life before he begins to understand the impact of his life upon those that God has placed within it. Do you know that your life is a gift? There was a time in my life that I didn't believe that my life was a gift. As a child, we were subjected to all types of trauma, neglect, and abuse. Growing up, we were like hot potatoes being passed back and forth between this relative and that relative. There was no stability. There was never really a solid home. We were lucky if we finished out 1 year in our class before we had to move again. We moved from city to city and to state to state. The majority of the time, we didn't even have a bed, let alone a room. But God had a plan for my life. I've never forgotten my first grade teacher. See, as a child, I had terrible eczema. Do you know what eczema is? And so every day when I get to school, my teacher would tell me, you need to ask your parents to buy you lotion. You need to be putting lotion on your hands. And so pretty soon I was afraid to see her because I thought I was in trouble. Because I'm not sure if I asked anybody, I don't know if anyone was really around, but I knew I couldn't get lotion. So one day when I got to school, she sent me to the back of the room. And there, at the back of the room, to my surprise, she had bought me my own bottle of lotion. And so she made me feel like I mattered. She made me feel valued. She made me feel loved. And here I am 50 years later still talking about her. And so I read a quote one time that said, people will often not remember the words that you said to them, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So acts of kindness can resonate for a lifetime in someone's life. Well, one day the same first grade teacher had an assignment for us kids, and she instructed all of us that we were going to be making cards for our moms. So it must have been Mother's Day. And I remember as a 6-year-old sitting there, and suddenly it dawned on me, well, as the kids were real excited about it, I'm like, well, why do they have a mom and I don't? And as it turns out, it had been over 18 months since I'd seen or heard from her, but I'd forgotten who she was. Shortly after this, the 5 of us, we were on our way to school one day, and as we're lined up, walking down the street, 2 women pull us into a Bob's Big Boy restaurant. And I didn't know who they were. My 2 older siblings seemed to recognize one of them. And as it turned out, it was our mom and her friend, and they were abducting us. And so they put us on a plane, and they flew us from Utah to Michigan. And once we got to Michigan, I got to meet my little sister, Charlie Jo. And boy, was she cute. She was a little over a year old. I didn't even know I had a little baby sister. And I loved babies. And from there, they took us to a horse racetrack and hid us out in the tack rooms. And they instructed us, you need to be very, very quiet. No one is to know that you're here. So we understood that we had to be quiet because there'd be big trouble if we were found. They got us coloring books, and they even got us a tape recorder. And I had so much fun with that tape recorder. I can remember just laughing so much that my belly hurt. And with that, even though my childhood was painful, it was difficult, there's a lot of memories that weren't good, I can still know that through it all, I had God. And through it all, I had an inner joy and inner peace. I was the kid that always had a smile on her face because I think God was there in the midst of it all, protecting me. Well, one day as we were sitting quietly in that tack room, me and my sister, our backs to the door, we never heard the door open. But suddenly, an excruciating sting upon our backs caused us to jump in pain and look to see what had happened. And as we turned to look, there was our mom's boyfriend, Charlie, with a horsewhip in his hand. And he just smiled, didn't say a word, closed the door and walked out. But God had a plan for my life. Throughout the years, we continued to bounce back and forth between this relative and that relative from state to state. Sometimes we were all together and sometimes we were separated. There was no stability, always a different home. We rarely had a bed, like I said earlier, let alone a room of our own. And we were also bullied terribly in school. There was no safe place. When I was 10, I was living in Ogden again, and one day our mom pulls up in a Buick. She looks at us kids and she says, well, who wants to come with me? And out of the 5 of us, me and my younger sister Cassie said, well, we do. So we jumped in the front seat of her car, and we couldn't sit in the back because in the back it was full of hay, and Riley and Mr. Ed were back there, a couple of goats. So we grabbed our little lucky dog and off we went to California. Well, once we got into California, she dropped us off with her mom, which was my grandma June, and it wasn't long, my grandma pulled me aside and she told me a family secret. She told me that the person I thought was my dad all these years wasn't my biological dad, that I had a different dad than my siblings. Now you would think, for a 10-year-old, that would be kind of devastating news to find out something like that. But for me, it was kind of a relief. I never really bonded with him and he was so abusive, but it kind of made me happy that maybe I could create my own dad. Well, it wasn't long that she set up a meeting and I got to meet my biological dad. And that was a very positive thing for me. As it turned out, he was a fireman in Las Vegas. He worked really hard and was involved in real estate, made a lot of money, and was doing really well. And he had a beautiful family. And so she set up an arrangement and drove from California to Las Vegas. He put us up in his little motel. And I remember that day, still today, I was standing outside, truck pulled up, and man got out. And we looked at each other and he said, are you John? Or he said, are you Michelle? I said, yeah. Are you John? He said, yeah. He said, well, you're healthy. I'm not sure what he was thinking, but maybe he knew something I didn't know. Well, and I'll go into a little more detail. See, the reason that I had a different dad is because my mom, I was the result of an extramarital affair. And so, maybe no wonder I never thought my life was a gift. Well, his wife accepted me, and she was very sweet to me, and she always told me, "You've got his smile." Well, I'm super thankful that my grandma did make that decision to let me know, but it was to be kept a secret. I wasn't to tell anybody, and so for several years I got to visit with them, and it was like my dream family. We'd go on vacations. He'd take me skiing and boating, and I remember just crying and crying when I had to leave and go back to the other life. I never went back to Utah after that. I pretty much stayed in Southern California and bounced back and forth between my grandma and my mom. One time when I was living with my mom in the Los Angeles area, I put a 7-year-old on the front of her bike. I was 12 years old, and we headed off down the hill. We was going as fast as we couldn't paddle anymore. We were just flying down that hill. All of a sudden, the bike went flying, and the boy went flying, and I think I must have skidded on the asphalt and bounced around a little bit because I took a lot of the skin off my face, knocked all my teeth loose, and my back was just raw. As I laid there on the asphalt, a man pulled up, put me in his car, and took me home. There, the oldest person around was my 15-year-old brother Gary, and he didn't know what to do. He thought the best thing to do was put salt on it. Oh. And I remember at some point an ambulance came, they took me to the ER, and eventually they located my mom, and she showed up from the bar, and after they let me go, you would have thought we would have went home, because here's this 12-year-old with her teeth loose and her face all swollen, but no, we went to the bar, and I remember we sat there until 2 in the morning, and so no wonder I didn't feel like my life had a lot of value. But God had a plan. Well, like I said earlier, school was very, very tough. Always a new kid, lots of bullying. But God brought me a special friend when I was in the 7th grade. And even, she was beautiful, and she was very popular, and had a lot of friends. But she chose me over her friends because they didn't like me. And so she kind of took me under her wings, and I spent most of my time there with her and her family. Her family kind of adopted me too, and everywhere they went, I was invited, and that meant going to church too. They were Christians. And that's where I remember one time being in church with them, and I heard the altar call, and of course I wanted to give my life to God. Why wouldn't I? And I remember going up, and I didn't have much of a foundation after I left there, or understanding what it meant to be a Christian, but I did definitely sense God's presence and His peace and His love. By the time that I was 15, I found myself in a very dark place. And not only did I not believe that my life was a gift, but I felt it was too painful to continue to live. And so I decided I would end my life. I took a bottle of Valium and went to sleep. And I remember when I woke up, almost feeling like, no, wait, I can't be here. I'm not here. I'm not still alive. I was so upset that I was still alive. I didn't want to be. And shortly after that, I decided I was leaving home, 15, no place to go, living in near Los Angeles. And thank God my friend, Wendy, from 7th grade, asked her mom if I could come and live with them, and she said yes. But she was so strict. We had to go to school, we had to go to church, we couldn't wear certain clothes or watch certain movies. And as a 15-year-old, I pretended to be bothered by all of this, but I loved it. She made me feel like she saw my life was a gift. Well, one day when I was 17, I never moved back home again. From there, I was kind of on my own. When I was 17, I went to go visit with my mom and my siblings, and as I was sitting in my mom's bedroom at her little round table, we were having a really nice visit. And out of the blue, she says, you know, it's a miracle that you're even alive. And I thought what she was talking about, because through growing up, I'd always heard the story about how I'd been ran over twice as a toddler. The second time that I was ran over, a truck ran over my body, stopped on top of my head, and then backed over my body a second time, crushing it, and I lived. But she went on. And as she went on, I could not believe what I was hearing. And I want to back up just a little bit to my friend Joanne, the Christian family. They bought me a t-shirt when I was about 13. And some of you might remember this t-shirt. It had a picture of a guy and it said, I'm okay, God don't make no junk. Anybody remember that shirt? So that shirt for me was, that's what I needed. I needed to know I was okay. So I wore that shirt. I wore that shirt everywhere. But anyway, so she went on to share that because of the way that my conception, she'd been married with 3 other children, that in secrecy and shame, she decided to get an abortion. And she had well, I'm gonna backtrack just a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit more about the story. So she had 3 young children. She was living in Ogden, Utah. Decided she wanted a different life. So she called an old boyfriend, which happened to be my biological father, and asked him to come and pick her up. So he made the drive from Vegas to Utah and picked her up, took her back, and before long, she was pregnant with me. And in an attempt to cover up the pregnancy, they devised a plan that she would go back to her husband and everybody would think it was his baby. So he gave her his little MG, little hardtop red MG, and sent her on her way. She got to St. George, Utah, so about halfway there, and suddenly the engine froze. So she had to call John to pick her up again. Turns out her husband had been to Vegas and put sugar in the tank, is what we learned later. And so she got back, and I think at this point he was starting to kind of like the idea of being a dad, and he was kind of getting excited and wanted to marry her. But she had other plans, and she wasn't. So one night she had gone to a bar and met some people, and they told her they could help her with a problem. And they introduced her to a back alley abortionist. She paid him some money. He performed the procedure without my biological dad knowing anything about it. She went back home, and she was scared because she was bleeding really, really heavy, and she thought maybe she was going to die. And so did he. And so, you know, they couldn't Google to find out what to do to stop the bleeding. I think they were afraid to go to a hospital because it wasn't legal. And they did everything they could. They even used powdered sugar for some reason. And eventually the bleeding did stop, but their relationship would never survive the trauma. So my mom ended up returning back to Utah, thinking that she had had the abortion was successful. And, you know, as nature would have it, eventually she knew it wasn't, and I was still there. And she told me that she had thought about trying another time, you know, seeking another abortion, but then suddenly she just felt the fear of God and thought, no, I better not. Maybe there's a reason this baby is still here. And, you know, my mom got a second chance, but so many women don't. My heart breaks for them. Even after learning about my miraculous survival, I still did not believe that my life was a gift. By the age of 20, I was a single mom of an almost 2-year-old and became pregnant by a man that I barely knew. And in my own shame and in secrecy, I made a decision to marry him. And I didn't know him. And I didn't even tell my dad I was going to marry him. We were living, at that point, I was living in Las Vegas, visiting with family in California, just to kind of say goodbye as we were making the journey to Oregon together with my dad to kind of start a life there. So we had we had our U-Haul truck, and we were heading from Vegas to Oregon, and I had to tell him at some point, not only am I pregnant, but I'm married. So we stopped at a truck stop, and I told him, well, I got to tell you something. I got married. You remember that guy Herb you met? Well, we got married. You did what? He was, you know, just, why did you do that? And just really upset about it. Are you pregnant? I said, yes. So with that, you know, Herb was a very violent, abusive alcoholic. He actually was kind of, he's from Hawaii, and he left the islands because he was a big-time drug dealer over there, and was kind of hiding from people that were looking for him. And before he could even get to join us in Oregon, he was arrested 3 times. That's how violent he was. I mean, halfway to Oregon, he stopped at a hotel, and next thing I know, I'm hearing from the police that he's in jail, the car's been impounded, and he's damaged the car. He's busted up the cop car. So I found this is kind of, for me, it was like, you know, I was 20 years old, I'm thinking, what am I doing? And I felt, this is where I came to a crossroads in my own life, where I wanted to run. And I thought, I am making so many bad decisions, and this is not the future that I want for myself or my children. And I thought, the only place that's safe to run right now is to God. And so there I was in the back of the little shop where I worked, and I just threw up my arms, and I said, God, I give you my life. I'm gonna stop doing what I want to do. I'm gonna do what you want me to do. And it wasn't long after that we got invited to a church, and they had a guest speaker, and I'd never seen anything like it in my life, but he was kind of reading people's mail. And he called us up and began to pray over us. And his prayer over me went, Father, I see her standing in her kitchen, and she's giving you God, and she's giving you praise for what you're doing in her husband's life. And sister, God wants you to know that he inhabits the praises of his people. Nobody knew that the day before, I was standing in my kitchen, very, very pregnant, doing the dishes, and the thought occurred to me that the Bible tells us that we're to give God thanks in all things. And so with the right heart and the right attitude, I began to have a conversation with God, and I began to thank him that I was married to an alcoholic. Thank him that my husband had just gone to the bar, gotten a fight, broke his arm, and because he had a broken arm, he couldn't work. And I don't know how we're gonna pay the rent, let alone this baby that's coming, because now we don't have health insurance because he didn't have the job. And so with that, just amazing that, you know, and it wasn't just that God saw me in my kitchen, but God began to pour I could sense his presence, and he began to pour into my spirit his love, his goodness, his kindness, his mercy. and to heal the brokenness that was there. And not only did he do a powerful work in my life, but he did the restoration in my own heart, but with my husband. I mean, it wasn't long. God totally transformed him, totally changed him, and he's been walking with God ever since. And as I reflect, here we are over 35 years later, with 10 children, 21 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. And generational chains have been broken, and their lives are a gift. Because God had a plan. Throughout our lives together, we've always had an open door policy. And with that, God has always placed somebody with us, and sometimes entire families have come to stay with us for a season of hope. God has also given me the opportunity to open up a Montessori preschool out of my home. And it's been operating for over almost 15 years now. We've had hundreds of children come in that have been, and families that have been blessed and influenced because I'm still alive. My life has been a source of comfort for my mom and for my siblings. I'd like to read to you, I don't think I brought it with me, but maybe I did. I'm going to read something to you here real quick. I told my mom I was coming to Colorado Springs, and she posted a message on my Facebook when she saw the notice of it. And this is the message that she wrote me. Missy, I love you so much. I am so thankful God gave me a second chance. You have been a blessing in my life every single day. I am very grateful for God's grace because you have become one of my life's greatest gifts. Love, Mom. See, God had a plan for my life, and God had a plan for her life, and God has a plan for your life. Because your life is a gift, and every life is a gift. Psalms 34:18 tells us, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those that are crushed in spirit. God had a plan for my life. Had abortion been legal, my mom could have easily walked into a Planned Parenthood, and my life would have been snuffed out. Just like, what is it, over 62 million children, million people have been snuffed out since abortion's been legal. What happened to safe and rare? There is no such thing as a safe abortion. And certainly they haven't been rare. Every successful abortion means there's a dead child. And women are still dying from them. Women are still being butchered. And women are still suffering the emotional trauma of so-called safe abortion. People say poverty and abuse justify abortion. But how do you think that makes me feel? And others like me that maybe we're in the foster care system or maybe experience poverty or abuse. That you think I would be better off dead? That my life didn't matter? You don't solve poverty by killing babies. You don't solve the foster care system by killing babies. You don't solve abusive situations by killing babies. You aren't pro-woman by offering to kill her child as a solution to her problems. I was that child. Had it been successful, the story of my redemption would be gone. My influence on hundreds of children that have come through my preschool program, gone. The impact of my love for my husband and my siblings, gone. The lives of my 10 children, 21 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren, gone. And my care for my mom today, gone. You may not even know the magnitude of your life on this earth until you reach heaven. I'd like to say this to this group here tonight. You know, you're part of the pro-life movement, and I want to thank you for giving your lives for those lives. And I believe when you get to heaven, there's going to be people thanking you. I want to thank you also for inviting me here tonight or today. And I'd like to close with a quote from Clarence the Angel. Strange, isn't it? How each man's life touches so many other lives. When he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he? Friends, your life is a gift. Every life is a gift.
Thank you, Michelle. What a blessing. I'm going to ask Michelle to come back up in case anybody's got any questions. Is that okay? Okay. Any questions that Michelle can answer about her story or about her experiences?
Yes.
I was just wondering if you've ever been approached to have a movie made of your life. That would be so powerful for people to hear.
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
Not yet. I'm just recently sharing it. I started working with Heidi, probably in June of last year. And so this is the 4th time that I've shared it.
Wow, it's a miracle.
Yeah, we serve a miracle working God, yes. Yeah. And we're all miracles, and I'm so thankful for all of you, so. And the work that you're doing.
Other questions? No? Oh, there's a question.
Yes.
I got a little confused. Was it your biological dad that took your mom for the abortion that didn't happen?
No, he did not. He would have never wanted her to get an abortion. He wanted to marry her, and he was excited. I would have been his first child. And I think he was scared in the beginning, and they wanted to cover it up. You know, it was back in 1964. I think he was afraid of her husband and afraid of what society would think of them. And for having that, yeah. But then I think he reconciled with it. And
Stephanie.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but I was just curious, like, how it made you feel when you found out that your mom tried to abort you.
it was devastating. It was devastating because I was 17, and it just, to be honest with you, the recording that continued to go off in my head afterwards was, see, you are garbage. You're worthless. You're just a failed abortion. Couldn't even do that right. And when we, and that's why for me, as an abortion survivor, I don't like to call the babies that have been aborted abortions, because they are not. That's a procedure. They are humans that were aborted.
How you ever survived being run over by a truck?
I have no idea. Complete miracle. You know, and somebody said earlier that when God plans something, it's not going to be stopped. So God had a plan, and that's why the abortion wasn't successful, nor the tire of the truck.
Yeah.
So.
Until you were in a body cast.
Oh yes. Oh, when I was ran over by the truck, I was in a full body cast. My aunt told me that she had gone to the hospital to see me, and all she could see was my tiny little face, because everything was bad. I have a scar from here to here where my skull was cracked open, and was not supposed to walk. I guess, I'd scooted around so much as a toddler, a busy kid, I wore it out, and so the doctor was real upset. He did not want to take it off, but they had to because it was just falling apart. And he told my mom, well, she will never walk, and even if she does, she's crippled. I got up and walked out. So just another miracle.
Wow.
Defy all the odds.
Yes.
No other questions? All right, Michelle, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'm thrilled to say that Michelle is also going to join us on the sidewalk tomorrow for our Rocky Mountain March for Life. We are looking forward to hearing more from her then. All right, I'm going to ask Matt to come back up. Oh, you had a question. Go ahead.
For you, I hate to sound too wimpy, how far is it between Planned Parenthood and Corpus Christi?
2.2 miles.
2.2 miles. However, the good news is if you don't feel like walking, once the rally is finished, there will be shuttle buses to take you back to Corpus Christi. So And I think what we've done in the past is the shuttle buses have kind of paralleled our course. So if you got halfway there and you're like, I need the shuttle bus, it'll be around. So, and it's not wimpy, trust me. Any other questions about upcoming events? Then I'm gonna let Matt come up, and he's got a blockbuster finish for us.
It's down.
It is downhill, that's right. March is downhill.
So I didn't know this was going to be so blockbuster until Michelle started speaking, because I did not know she was going to make a reference to It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey and this stuff. So this morning, literally, I was reading, catching up on my National Catholic Register, and this is actually the January 2nd edition. And there on the opinion, the in-depth page, is a story by K.V. Turley. It's titled, The Story of George Bailey and the Value of Human Life. I was reading it and I got the impression that I had to talk about it today. Yes. So when you said that, I did. So here, the prayer and stuff, God's still working through it. And I'm just the conduit, I guess, for this particular one. So just a couple things that he mentions. One, that movie came out in 1946. And it did very poorly.
Yes. Can I share a little bit too? I'll let you finish.
I'll finish. Yes, by all means. By all means. That was right after World War II, and they weren't really looking for that kind of movie. You know, people who were going out for entertainment, and so it didn't do very well. And it wasn't really heard of. At least this is my understanding until about 1974, and it was through a clerical error. Did you know all this?
I didn't know that part.
Okay. Yes, according to him, there was a clerical error in 1974 where they were going to renew the copyright and they forgot to. They just didn't do it. And so, well, of course, then that made it public domain. And the means of media at the time had changed. It wasn't no longer was the theater the place, it was the television. And the television was a mass market thing. Well, because it was public domain, of course, they all jumped on it. And so a lot of people saw the movie who wouldn't have otherwise seen it if it had still been in copyright. 1974. Do people remember 1974? I know some of you don't. But for one thing, well, I need to make this short probably. I mean, we had wars, we had a president assassinated, and then another one had to resign. The big thing, just a few months earlier, Roe versus Wade passed. And so here you have this happening. Suddenly, everybody's seeing this movie. And it's making, in a lot of ways, 1974 was probably even more a worse situation than 1946. And so, let me get to his. So some of the things he says, and so I don't want to take away too much from him because I'm sure God was using this as part of this. I'm just the conduit. So he's talking about localism, but he says what is present in the movie's frames, however, is the recognition that local communities are made up of individual people who belong to families and neighborhoods. Here there are no masses or economic units. The critique of the unrestrained free capitalists such as Mr. Potter, the film's villain, and his ilk is not that they are capitalists, but that they are solely interested in profit and not people. Yes. Potter has the same mindset towards people as a Communist Party official does, namely that they are a mass that needs to be manipulated for economic or political profit. And so he ends by saying that the central theme of the film, that this is had George Bailey not lived, then many other events would never have taken place and many other lives would have been impoverished as a result. I mean, you remember that from the movie. And so he ends his article by saying, "It's a Wonderful Life," the movie, entered the public consciousness just as the Supreme Court ruling had consigned a generation to non-existence. Perhaps that is why the film appeared again, this time to huge audiences on television networks across the land, implicitly asking viewers how many George Baileys were now to be scrubbed from history through Roe versus Wade. And so, it's right there. And I read it this morning. God does, he's a very just in time kind of person. And so, by all means, any
No,
comments?
I just was gonna say too, with the, he'd had a dream about, yes, okay. Well, the story originated from a dream. He dreamed it. After he dreamt it, he wrote it out and he tried to get it published. And he was turned down by multiple publishers. They didn't want the story. So he decided he'd just send it out in a Christmas card. So he sent out 200 Christmas cards with the story in it to friends and family. Somehow it ended up in the hands of Frank Cappa and was it Jimmy Stewart? Was that, yeah. And so they paid, can you guess how much they paid for it? $10 grand, which would have been a lot of money back then, but $10,000 they bought the story. So, and you're right, and then it didn't do well. So that's what I wanted to share.
Do you have anything else?
No.
All right, well. Can we have one more round of applause, please, for our guest speakers? I can't believe you've only done this a few times. You're getting good at this.
Good teacher. Great coach.
So thank you again for coming to our Together for Life event to celebrate Sanctity of Life Sunday. I'm not going to kick you out, but we do have to be out by 3, so you got a little time to visit. If there are people in the room that you haven't met or that you'd like to ask questions of or talk to personally, please take time to do that. There is still some coffee and there's some snacks, so enjoy yourself, and thank you again for coming.
And Michelle, so I was able to give some of you this, but Michelle wrote a poem and she wanted to give everybody a copy of it. If you didn't get one, I have some right over there on the table that you can pick up as well.
Thanks, Heidi. And thank you again, all of you, for coming.
Reading all I heard is very good. I was watching but what a great university. But now you're is Michelle the first university to talk about this? Could you imagine? Amazing.
Okay, I'll text you. There was a guy that died and he wasn't a Christian. He wasn't He talks about the baby. He wasn't a Christian. He wasn't. He was a liberal person. The babies were there.
She's done a great job with it. I mean, no, really, no. There's a concept of so you get to statistics of 500 a year. Is that 500? You said survivor abortions. Okay. That's the one I know. Her name, do you know her last name? Oh, so, yeah, of course. Yeah. She was here. She spoke at, she spoke in Denver once, I think. the martial arts. She's relatively famous in the pro. Yeah.
It's Dr. Willem Cates. He's the doctor that studies this.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to.
I don't know if it's around the world, 4 to 500.
Yeah, I think that's, well, I'm going to go out to Melissa's website, Ocean Survivors, and get some of the statistics, because that's really a powerful story, that the whole concept, and that you're getting them, well, you're giving them the equivalent to be able to come out and speak, which is powerful. We had the silent review, which is the women, and sometimes men, there's also women who have some abortions at the same time. But this group is, it's a powerful perspective in her life in general. So, anyway. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, she said that. I like the way she, and we often talk about abortions, how many abortions, the way she processes things. I mean, abortions really does talk about the procedure, and it's not any better with, well, it's not any better than talking about fetuses, which is a different stage, actually, it's on the life person. It was great. Jim Bach, I've seen one of the parishes. But yeah, the Christian college is all over the place. I mean, I've heard about it, I've read about it, but because your president was there along with a whole bunch of, well, not maybe 25, 30 kids, they weren't all kids, but it was really, yes, she mentioned it, that they have a cause. It's the biggest club, he said. Anyway, thanks for what you're doing here. It's great. So, yeah.
It should have been,